Hello and welcome to the meeting of the Rotary E-Club of District 7710 for Tuesday, September the 11th. Thank you for joining us. We have Rebecca Dowd tonight. We're excited and honored to have her as our guest presenter today. She is the president and NCAEA and art educator of Durham Public Schools. Rebecca Dow has just begun her 14th year of teaching and is expected to graduate in December 2018 with her MA in Adult Education from East Carolina University. Her teaching experience ranges from early childhood through middle school and the last 10 years in elementary. A deep passion of arts education combined with a desire for social justice led Dow to seek new opportunities in building programming and advocacy with the North Carolina Art Education Association and to earn her MA. Between work, graduate school, and NCAEA, she stays very busy but always finds time for her treasured 3 children ages 16, 18, and 20. With that said, I'd like to let Rebecca Dow present.
Hello, and thank you so much. It's good to be here. This is probably my first opportunity, I believe, to present to non-art teachers or teachers. I've presented many times to teachers. So with that, best practice generally suggests that we take questions as we go. So I know you have a question and answer period at the end, which is fine. But please feel free to ask questions as we go. I tried to be careful not to use too much education jargon, but if I do and it needs clarification, please let me know. I will not be offended. Here on my first screen, you'll see I have 2 emails. The first one there is my personal email, obviously, and that will be available for whatever, and president at ncaiea.org, that will stay with the president of our association. So if for some reason down the line, 2 years, you want to contact the president of the organization, that won't be me anymore, but that will always get you in touch with that organization. Okay. So this week, you may not have realized, one of the reasons I chose this date when Rhonda gave me the option was because this is National Arts and Education Week. So I just want to put a little plug in for that. There's a bunch of hashtags and at people to post any of your stories. Maybe you have some artwork. I heard of a guest that we have has some music talent. So there you go. It's all the arts. And if you just hashtag them, they want us to literally blow up the internet with our art advocacy stories. Hopefully we don't lose power this week and everybody can still do that. So what am I going to go over today? These are some of the things I'm going to...
I'm sorry,
yes?
Rebecca,
go ahead.
Still on page 1.
Oh, are you not seeing my page change?
No.
Are you able to move to presenter mode? It was in it, but it changed, it seems. If you go to the bottom of the screen, towards the right-hand side, it's kind of on the far right, on the very bottom of your
far right
power presentation, your
display.
PowerPoint presentation. There's a screen there. You can click that screen on the bottom right.
There's nothing on the bottom right.
Yep, there you go.
Is that's working now?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. So if I change it, can you see this?
Yes.
Arts and education?
Yes.
Okay. So did you not see that a minute ago?
No.
Okay. So there's that screen then. Okay. And then moving on to what we're going to look at today. I'm going to try to just kind of cap and build a big picture of these things. There's a lot of information that can come in here. What I try to do is piece together some information from different areas to give you an idea as to how some of this comes together and why things are the way they are in education and how art can fill in some of those gaps. So one of the things I like to ask, I was also an at-home mom for 10 years. So my perspective of this comes from actually both sides of the fence, so to speak. So when we have a 2 to 4-year-old, I'm not sure how many of you have children. I know a couple of you do. But have you ever been around a 2 to 4-year-old and wondered to yourself, what is going on? They're into everything. And we call it the terrible twos or terrible threes. But I'm wondering if you ever stop to wonder what really is happening at that point. What's going on in their minds? And a lot of people, when they answer me, will say, I don't know. And really what's going on is that love of learning, that curiosity is developing, and how we deal with it at that point determines their curiosity and their love of learning going forward. So, for example, you might have a child who's getting into everything, and you might have a parent who disciplines them for getting into that and not recognize that that's curiosity and that they need to embrace it and guide it. So what starts happening is that shuts down. When my children were little, I used to scoop them up when they started that and start telling them about those different pieces, what they are, and building that vocabulary. They also had access to the arts, being able to draw, being able to color. And the biggest piece of this is parent or adult conversation. A lot of times we leave children to kind of just play on their own, which is a good thing. But what's important to know is they need to have that interaction where the parent or the guardian or the teacher is kind of prompting them with questions, setting an example of how a story comes together, asking them questions and kind of leading them on that path. And there's something that I'm going to kind of repeat throughout this presentation is a statement that I heard over the summer, which I think is a great way to explain some things, is that a statement shuts down curiosity, but a question opens it up. So I'll probably repeat that a couple of times, and that's so true at this early age. So before we really dive in, I wanted to just give you some quotes from some other sources that show what art is. It's documented throughout history, even if you want to go back to the cave days where we have the cave drawings. All children draw before they can write. We have people showing and documenting throughout the last several decades of how language is just a natural development from drawing pictures. And what happens in education is we often end up showing this as a product. And so this is kind of where we start getting into some misconceptions about what art is. I think it becomes something that we all say, oh, I can't do that. We go to see an art show and we're amazed by the talent, which is great. However, there's a whole process of learning and exploring and self-reflection that happens before that. But at the early stages of development, when a child is little, between the ages of 2 and 4, that time is crucial. So when we talk about the achievement gap, it begins before they ever enter school. And it often happens with children who are living in poverty because they're not being exposed to these experiences where they can build, where they can create, where they can explore. And also, parents are so busy trying to work and piece things together to provide for their families that they're not getting that one-on-one. So art is a language. It's also a way of learning. And so not so much a product. And just to kind of illustrate that, this is an example of a 5 and 6-year-old. The top row of pictures here are children who are 5 and 6 who drew having less than 1 hour television a day. This row down here are drawings from the same age group, but those who had more than 3 hours of television a day. I thought that was really powerful and a good example of what happens when children don't have that interaction and that feedback from an adult. There's a study that I read recently that stemmed from Australia, but I think is really relative to what we're doing here in the United States with our education. And their study, what they did was they started looking at children as soon as they entered school, where they were and how they were developing and progressing. And what they found was that the school system actually sets children up to fail, because what happens is they enter kindergarten and they are either at grade level or below. And so when they come in without those skills that they might have missed for whatever reason when they were at home from their toddler years, there's this mentality that we have to catch them up, that we have to get them the basics, which of course is true. However, what happens is the arts are pulled for more tutoring. And so again, when you start talking about that natural progression of literacy, we lose a key piece of development for them. And if you could listen to or believe in Maslow's basic needs theory, you have to satisfy the basic need sometimes before you can move on. So if you try to skip that development stage where they're drawing, then you're always going to be behind. You're just never going to catch up. Are you all with me? Okay. All right. So there's a lot of reading there, and I'm not going to read it to you. The main thing that I wanted to show you here is begin to see that process that we use in our education. So we use the creative process over here. The writing process is in the middle, and then the engineering process over here. You can also include the science theory process. They're all in alignment. They're all very similar. And yet it's the writing process that gets the focus and attention in schools. And what happens as a result of this is you start seeing subjects taught in isolation. So you start losing the connections. You also will see students start losing their connection, their meaning, and their understanding because they're not being able to take what they're reading and apply it somewhere else, or to have any kind of relativeness from it there. And it's interesting to know that our North Carolina Central Standards actually show what I've just been talking to you about, that visual literacy is promoting fluency for visual communication, and it is a means to express their ideas, their emotions, and their knowledge. And yet, and at the second part here, you see their critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So we have these standards, the state created them, and yet art classes are still an add-on, or they only have them once a week. They're not as integrated into the curriculum. We also have national, global, and federal organizations that acknowledge this process, this language connection and connection with society and our learning. And like I said, we're still kind of in this place where we're an add-on or an addition to. So before I go any further with that aspect of it, I thought it would be wise to take a look at the system. This is a diagram I put together, and mind you, this is part of a much bigger document that I created this summer for an internship. This is just looking at the influences of the school system and society. So when we think of a student and their education, and as I pointed out, it actually begins before they ever get to a school. And mind you, this is not to place blame. This is not in judgment. We're going to look at just the way that we influence our society and the way our school is set up. So you have the student here, and the student is affected by every single piece outside of that circle. So they're affected by the whole school system. They're affected by faith, culture, poverty, racism, healthcare, the local government, businesses, and of course, state legislation, that can affect all of those things. So what I'd like to kind of point out here is we claim to have a student-centered curriculum where everything is for the student. But if you look at the way the system is set up, the student, sure, is in the center of the adult decisions, but the students don't have a voice. Somebody else has decided what they should learn. They don't really get a say as to what they want to learn. So their interests, you know, all of those are considered, but when do we actually ask the student? When do we actually ask what they are interested in learning? Sometimes I wonder whether or not I should share this piece of information. Just so you know, I guess I'm going to go ahead and share it. There is this well-known fact that third grade test scores are a key piece of deciding information. So government officials and I guess those who are running prisons will look at third grade test scores to determine or predict how many prison beds that they're going to need down the road. And I think that's really alarming because we have all this information, we have all this data to show how the arts are integral in language development. We know that the age gap starts before they get to school. We know that it's mostly with children living in poverty. We understand how this is set up, and yet when it comes to budgets, and I know this is really hard, so again, this is not judgment, our priorities seem to not really focus on that child. They seem to focus on the aftermath. So when we think about responsibility of the child, I put up a few questions here that I'm just going to read them. I'm not going to answer them or talk about them. These are more for self-reflection questions and kind of guide us in this conversation and education. And I'll pull it back together in just a minute. So when you're thinking about a child's education, and again, that starts before school starts at kindergarten. What is each position in that big picture diagram? What is their goal and their purpose in relation to education? Do you believe every child can learn? What kind of education should every child have access to? And what impact does poverty have on education, and who should assist in this area? Poverty's been around for a long time, and nobody's asked to be born into that. So we have children who have no voice in the school system and are living in poverty. So who is responsible for their education? This is a diagram that we have that's kind of floating around the internet. And what I'd like to point out here is that North Carolina law states that every child has an equal opportunity, a right to an equal opportunity in education. And what they define that as is a basic, sound education. And so I want to challenge that for a minute, because when you look at this visual, you can see what equal is. This student with equal opportunity still can't see over the fence. And then you have equitable, where we give them extra services to help them. So now they can see over the fence. But then, of course, there's justice, where we actually remove the barriers that they're facing. And that's a huge piece. You know, I think this part right here is where we could kind of talk about institutionalized oppression, and that's not the point of this, so I won't go there, but that's kind of where that's heading to. So when you kind of think about where students are beginning their education in kindergarten, when you understand teaching that it's based on prior knowledge, just like you and I, if we were to sit down and read a book, or even listening to some of this factual information I'm giving you now, you're basing it and you're reflecting on it on what you already know about education, what you've experienced in education. And we do the same thing when we read a book. That's how we're taught. That's how we develop and understand knowledge. That's how we further our understanding. So what about when they enter kindergarten? no two people are coming to the table with the same background, with the same knowledge, and yet we give them the same text. Now, we do level them a little bit, but we're also talking about strategy. So here's where I'm going to kind of be a little personal. I'm one of those students. I did well in school. I understood things, but I always felt a disconnect. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that I learned through process. I learned through the arts. That was my language. Verbal language was not my initial strength, even though I did well in school. So, but my understanding wasn't there. I remember sitting in first grade. I never forget my teacher's name. Her name was Mrs. Cloran, and they were having a group discussion, and I remember sitting there thinking, I don't get it, okay? But I still did well in school. I still knew what the answers were. So this right here, text to self connections, text to text connections, text to world connections, those are actually in the literacy standards that are taught in the schools. There's no indication in them about using the same concepts for art. I actually pulled and read another book from the National Art Education Association where it actually takes the same literacy strategies and uses it in art with pictures. And in doing so, you can actually meet students where they are. You can use pictures, you can help them build their own narratives. So instead of giving them a narrative that's already created that they may have no understanding of or relation to, you can let them create their own visual and then apply those literary techniques. And that gives them a better understanding and connection to the world around them, to themselves. You can also then compare it to other text. This makes it relative. It makes it meaningful. And in doing so, you eliminate the barrier. I think of my ESL students. I have 56% ESL students. And even though they might be in third grade, they're learning English at a kindergarten level. So if you give them a kindergarten level text, they're not going to be interested. But you can't give them a third grade text either because they're not there. So what is a strategy that you can use to help them learn? And there you go. But again, in the school system, we're not quite there yet. I also often hear teachers say things like, well, we modeled in class and they got all the answers right when we did it together, but then when they have to apply it on a test, they don't get it. And that to me is a huge piece of evidence that the initial teaching was not relative to that student. And as an example, this is actually just this year, is one of my tweets that I tweeted. These three girls are fifth graders. The first opening project I did for this school year was about peace and about community. So their assignment, I wanted to keep it completely open-ended. I asked them to show peace. I asked them to show their family. Those are the only criteria I gave them. We looked at some artwork. These are the two pieces we looked at. This is Edward Hicks, Peaceable Kingdom. And we looked at Norman Rockwell's Do Unto Others as You'd Have Done to You, because we're talking about rules and building that peaceful environment. And so I did not ask them to do this, but I've had them for several years. And through the different art projects that they've been doing, they asked me, they raised their hand and were like, Miss Dow, can we put our pictures all together and connect them? And I was just thrilled, because that's what art is. They're not only relating to themselves, they're relating to each other, and they realize that that community, they had to work together to fulfill that. So that is just a perfect example of how art can progress from the early stages of language development and developing your story to then being able to connect to yourself and the outside world around you. I'm not going to read all this. This is a piece of a pamphlet that is going around, and I just love what it says here. It is showing that art is a process. It's just summarizing the different things that it is. And so just real quickly, I'll name some of them. Students are making complex choices. They're learning how to make good judgments. They're celebrating multiple perspectives. They're learning how to see and interpret what they see around them. That problems have multiple solutions. They're all doing peace, but you'll see their project when they're done. They're all different. That words are not all we know to express how we're feeling or what we're thinking. And sometimes words aren't enough to express everything. They're also going to be able to see how a small change can have big effects. It helps build self-identity, empathy, and it gives them that voice. It gives them a voice because they can choose what they want to explore and apply the concepts that are being taught. As an example of how art is sometimes, or words rather, are sometimes not enough, this is just a piece from my visual journal that I did this summer. I did the color one here first. And I think I was feeling really happy. I love color. It is my language. I love blending the colors. I love combining colors. But there was a piece of me that felt a little sad as I was making this, and I didn't quite understand why until I took a picture of it and posted it, and I used the black and white filter. And I realized as I was doing that it was, color is my camouflage, and I was kind of wrestling with the meaning of that. And I realized what that was kind of coming to terms, even though I felt like I did it years ago, with white privilege and how that affects my students. So on one hand, I love color and I want everyone to embrace color, but then also there's a piece of me that was sad. So looking at the two different pieces, I feel like there's a totally different message by taking away the color of the second one. So in giving them their voice, what we start to see in students is intrinsic motivation, self-directed learning. When they experience that success, it motivates them to do more. And when they can experience that success in something they love to do, the feeling and the effect becomes tenfold, so to speak. This is from a professor. Her name is Professor Delaney Ingalls Venata. She was actually one of our board members on the North Carolina Art Education Association. And I went to one of her workshops at the national convention, and she had this, and I just thought that was amazing. So even at the college level, she teaches people to become art teachers. She's still using this. She also works with the design element. So she teaches design for those who are going into the private sector. And she's still talking about being curious, being creative, not being afraid to ask questions, to make connections, to be that risk taker and have resilience. And that is a great summary of what art does from K-12, starting with the language development and just building that self-identity, building the voice, all the way through, well, as you saw, I'm still doing it, so you can take that into adulthood. And as I said earlier, statements shut down creativity while questions open it up. And this is really in the heart of what I'm trying to work on within our education, is making that shift from the traditional stereotype of what an artist is or what art is. I'm willing to bet that many of you at some point said, I can't do this, or I don't have a talent, and walked away from it. And that's a shame, because it really shouldn't be about that. It should be about the exploration and the process that you go through and learning, because hopefully you don't stop learning as you become an adult. Loved this quote here. I haven't read the others, but I do want to read this one. It's Creative people ask the big questions. They're insatiably curious. They generally opt to live the examined life, and even as they get older, maintain a sense of curiosity about life, whether through the intense conversation or solitary mind wandering. Creatives look at the world around them and want to know why and how it is that way. And just to kind of end this, this was a quote and a piece of work that I did. Kind of oversimplifies the whole thing, but to give you a visual, I've always said that art is to your brain what oil is to an engine. Trying to have school without it or as an isolated subject just doesn't do it justice. So I'm hoping that through time and advocacy, we can kind of change that. We have a long ways to go, but we also have things like Arts and Education Week this week, which is celebrated on national level. So that is about it. There's also the National Art Education Association. I love their saying as well. They say that we are shaping human potential. And I think that's the best way to wrap that up. So that's a lot of information. And I tried not to go too detailed because I wasn't quite sure where you were all at. I'd love to know your thoughts, questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was a great presentation. Please, do anyone ask questions, please?
So Rebecca, I was wondering, can you define art for me?
Sure. So, yeah, and there are times in there, I meant to define that for you earlier. So when we say art, generally that means visual art. But when you're talking about the arts and you make it plural, you're including dance, theater, chorus, band, you're including all of them.
So you said several times that art is not a product. And while I agree with that, I do feel like it's a means of communication, especially with young children. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is, and that's really what I want to see happen, is to see it more as a form of communication, as a learning process, rather than the end product. Now, we know it does have an end product, but like I said, a lot of times I think because we focus on the end product, we lose that meaning. So that's what I kind of was trying to do, is just kind of shift our attention, because I think, you know, when you have adults who are making decisions and they've experienced that, oh, I can't do this because it's all about talent, I think that's one of the places where we start losing the possibilities that we can have with art, that science, that research is starting to show. And of course, we still have the problems with the way our school system is set up, and that's kind of why I had to bring that in, because it's twofold.
So as an adult, you know your topic. You're, like, for example, as an art teacher, you know art, right? Mm-hmm. And yet I think that we forget that we know that. And we know what we know. And so it becomes hard for us to relate to somebody who doesn't, who's coming up.
Right.
And we like, well, you can't, you don't need this anymore. And it's because you as an adult don't need that anymore. You know, years ago, I taught a class, and I could actually do all of the stuff that I taught in that class in my head. And then I realized that the students who were sitting in the seats didn't have that same level of knowledge. And I think that most people forget that. They forget that these people who I'm talking to don't have that same level of knowledge. Or these people who are, you know, the 2 to 4 year olds, the 6 to 8 year olds, you know, pick your age range. They don't have that same level of knowledge that I do. And so we as adults tend to think that you don't need that.
Right.
You know? Does that make sense?
Yes. And that's all the more reason to bring in the arts. And I don't mean just visual art. Of course, visual art is my thing, but I was also a dancer growing up. So I understand that connection with dance as well, and music. My parents were musicians, or still are musicians. I think, you know, if I look back at, don't make you sick, I'm going to scoot back to my diagram. when you look at this diagram, I included a gap ring around here. And that gap, I think, can go also, it could come after a teacher. And if you think about children, how they develop, if nothing fills that gap, if they don't develop a hobby, or if they don't have a mentor, if they don't get involved with, say, church or sport, they're going to fill that gap with something. And I think it's important for us to think about what they're filling that gap with. Is it media? Is it technology? And I'd like to challenge us to be an adult as a mentor or a program that they can get into that is more positive.
I like that, Rebecca. I think that was pretty powerful. Looking at this again, I'm a parent, you know, have 2 biological, total 6 children, 4 stepchildren. So I really, really, really resonate with the gap, as you said. I made sure that my children were active in something, a club, a sport, or something, because I recognize, actually not literally looking at it like this, but in my thought processes of how I grew up and the trouble that I got into and the life that I had as a very young child, it was because I recognized there's a big gap and I was able to fill it up with a lot of junk. And so it's nice to see that teachers are able to see at this level. I want to get back to your question or your comment about the prisons. Looking at 3rd grade data, determine the number of beds. I mean, that is like shocking, but I know we don't have time tonight, but I just wanted to understand, where did that come from? Is that data in the prison system? Is that something that how is that?
I actually don't know the answer to that, but I could find out. I was told that at an educational workshop that I went to.
Okay.
And I can't remember what they said the source was.
Okay.
It's a bit frightening.
It is frightening.
And because of this gap, to me, the prison system would be better off investing, the state would be better off investing in that gap, you know, making sure that we have places for our kids to go after school, or other than after school programming, but also, you know, in certain neighborhoods and community, you know, led programming, you know, that to fill that gap, because that gap could lead you one way or the other. So.
Right. And so the thing to remember is, for children living in poverty, that gap often starts before they enter school. I have several children who I know are left home alone. We're talking a 1st and 2nd grader to take care of a younger sibling.
Yeah.
You know, we have families who are desperate. And again, I don't say that in judgment. And I also know the state legislation, that's a tough job. It's one that I wouldn't want. However, you have to question a little bit when this is factual information that they have access to, and yet instead of investing in programs, wraparound services, we call them in education system, maybe it's an after-school type program, maybe it's healthcare. We're not helping those earlier years. We know that's where the gap starts, and yet we look at 3rd grade test scores instead of going back to where it starts and saying, okay, what can we do? And so that's what, like I said, is one of the reasons I love the arts, is because they're there, the whole spectrum.
Well, thank you so much. We are coming close to an end, and we really appreciate your time. It looks like a great opportunity for public and private partnership, as you say, to continue to increase the art education. So thank you so much for that. And I'm going to just real quick share my screen and just again say a note of thanks from our Rotary E-Club, our digital-based club. We're really appreciative of your time and sharing your knowledge about the arts with us. So with that, we're giving you a certificate of appreciation and on today for imparting valuable insights and inspiration as our guest speaker.
Thank you. And if you have any questions that come up after, I know some of those things were tough issues, so please feel free to email me. I'd be happy to have those discussions.
Directly after tonight's meeting, I will forward the speaker and actually speakers from July, including tonight, information, as well as she was sharing the actual presentation with us. So we'll have that available. As always, we also have the the recording tonight on our YouTube channel. So please be sure to check that out. And Tim, as our guest, would you like to read our 4-way test, please?
Absolutely. Of the things we think, say, or do, number one, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you so much. With that, let's close of our evening, and thank you all for your time. We